Good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Hussey. I'm the Communications Manager at Cabot Credit Management. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're fortunate to be joined by Jaime Nuwar-Graham, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Cabot Financial, and Joe Causon, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Customer Service. So thank you both for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Our title of our webinar this morning is Customers' Attitudes Towards Debt and How That Should Make Us Think. And we're going to have Joe and Jaime. First of all, Jamie's going to share some of the latest information we have on how people are thinking around their debt. And then Joe and Jaime are going to take us through a bit of a conversation really around how should that make us feel? What should we be thinking about? And I guess what are the things we can do as part of that industry to react to that, do the right things, and try and get the best outcomes for our customers. We're also going to give all of you online an opportunity to get involved. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat or the Q&A facility at the bottom. I'm going to try and leave a quarter of an hour or so at the end for any of those, but I may well, as I've said to Joe and Jaime already, kind of throw a few of those in if they're relevant to something we're talking about live. I may well bring some of those in as we go through. So yeah, hopefully you guys can get involved and hear a little bit about the things that you find interesting in today's information. So yeah, without further ado, then Jaime, I'll get the pack on the screen.
Fantastic.
I'll let you take us through the data.
Cool. Good morning, everybody. So you may have seen this before, but this study actually takes a different angle to that you might expect. We're not looking at consumer attitudes towards Cabot, their perception of the collections industry, but actually the feelings about debt itself. So the starting point really is not one of conflict. What you'll see as we go through is a real feel of mutually aligned aspirations. There's a real opportunity. Customers are saying they want to be debt-free. We want to help them get to be debt-free. We've got a clear mutual interest, but there's some real nuances come out because why that connection so often does not get made. What gets in the way, how we enable it. And that's where a lot of the richness comes out, because challenge is how we can tap into this to change perceptions, because if you can't engage with the customer, we can't work with them. We can't say, how do we look to change these perceptions? Because there's a few surprising messages there that will come through. So, if we step on, Neil, I think, what did we look at and why? What the heck is economic freedom anyway? Yeah, it's deliberately a bit of an ambiguous term. I know what it means to me. It means, where possible, finding ways to help customers repay in the shortest affordable time, where they can't, giving them that support. But fine, it just doesn't really matter what it means to me. What does it mean to our consumers? Yeah. How does this help us work more closely and effectively with them? And we deliberately haven't targeted this at Cabot customers. We haven't even targeted it at customers in debt. This is looking to general population. It's something we do in the UK and in the US. This is the third time we've done this study, and it's understanding how they feel about their finances, the economy, their attitudes towards debt, and what it means to us. So, we spoke to 3,000 customers, and what we'll bring out over the next slides, then hopefully in the discussion is, what it says about their views, their aspirations, and how they'd like to be supported. So, if we look at the headline stats, I kind of post that question of, what does economic freedom mean to you? And this probably sounds like for those of a certain generation like myself, a bad Les Dennis impression. So yeah, we asked 3,000 people what economic freedom means to them. Ding, our survey said, top answer, 27% was being debt-free. So, that's actually why we posed it as a bit of an ambiguous. What is economic freedom? What do you want from a freedom perspective? And the default answer for over a quarter of customers was being debt-free. Now, it changes a bit by demographic, but what we're seeing is almost all of the customers with past due debt say they intend to pay it off. Overwhelmingly, they say it's important and it's the right thing to do. They overwhelmingly think, really understand the benefit of affordable credit for the economy. And actually, we'll see that when we come back to, you can pose a question that's quite generic about benefits to the economy, but affordable credit, and customers see the link between that and credit score, between credit scores and debts. And so there's a real positive attitude here, but there's a fear factor as we go through. So being debt-free was the most selected definition, but if we dive into that a little bit more, as I said, this wasn't just customers in debt. So Neil, if we move to the next slide, actually we'll see of this sample, 1 in 5, 19%, customers in this had a past due debt already. Yeah, we know how the cost of living crisis impacted consumers. We know the concerns, the worries, the historic stigma towards debt. But yeah, perceptions there, and I've said it again, is yeah, we think it's important to repay our debts. Customers are telling that. We want to help customers do that, but the pressures are still there, and it's not rocket science. We know a lot of these pressures, but overwhelmingly, and even more so as we go through, yeah, that cost of living crisis is saying customers are being quite specific. They're seeing the pressure really is inflation. That's what's causing the biggest pressures. Their biggest spend is groceries and food. And they can really feel that pinch coming through. So whilst there's that desire to repay debt, those barriers, and you see it if you read the media, look, all the discussion we're seeing is around benefits changes, minimum wage, tax thresholds, electricity bills, the cost of shopping. It is becoming very, very real. In the immediate post-COVID years, there was that level of insulation of savings people have paid up. But whilst we're seeing an increasing desire, a willingness, and actually eagerness to repay the debt, those pressures are really starting to bite. Household debt is still rising, particularly if you look at like the latest Citizens Advice research. So how does this come together? So if we move to the next slide, what are the big things? Financial literacy is lacking. We're not fluent as a nation, and the same in the UK and the US. We're not fluent in the language of money. 2/3 of customers do not understand how to build and maintain credit. I mean, I'm not going to bore you to death with the stats. You can dive into it. People are comfortable with savings, but as we go down, yeah, how do I budget? How do I manage my credit score? What is the impact? How do I manage debt? It drops off a cliff. 2/3 of customers do not know how to build credit. Half of our consumers do not know what their credit score is. 1 in 2 struggle to budget. And actually, the vast majority say, look, we'd like to have free online tools to help us. But many actually don't even know that they're already there. They don't know how to access them. So how can we help? We ask them, how do we help? Well, education is for them. Customers say, we want to be given resources. But we want to be given free and easy access to credit scores. If you listen so often, the narrative and the discussion we're hearing more and more in surveys and customer dialogue and adverts is, what is my credit score? How do I increase it? How do I manage? There's a real understanding that it's important, but they don't really understand what it is or how to access or how to manage it. And actually, customers are going to say, how do we incentivize good habits? How do we reward and support? And this isn't just about helping them see this red figure on my statement is reducing, because that's not the aspiration. The aspiration isn't the number on the statement. That aspiration is economic freedom, being debt free. So not now you only owe £2,500. How is that contributing towards your aspirations to be debt free? How will that build through towards your credit score? How will it build through your ability to access credit? How will it build through? So it's actually incentivizing isn't always monetary. It's about rewarding and seeing those steps and enabling people to see the impact it's having in getting towards what they want to achieve rather than managing a number. So it's really what binds us to it. So yeah, it's things that, what are our customers' preferences? How do they want to contact us? How do they want to speak with us? And yeah, if we move next slide, and this gets into a lot of detail, because we break it down. If you get into the research and if you read the book, there are subtle nuances as we get down. We break it down by demographic, by income thresholds, and there is a lot of nuance here, but not a lot of real surprises. Almost everyone needs help. That top chart says 83% of customers need some help in doing it. 96% want to pay off their debt. And that has increased significantly. So I'm going to show what a maths whiz I'm here. 96% wanting to pay off their debt means only 4% do not intend to. So that is some quality maths for a morning. For those of you, I remember I've been involved in this industry for a long time. A phrase that I always used to hate was people saying the can't pays and the won't pays. There are won't pays. 96% want to pay off their debt. And actually we see some of the nuance in the shifts. So this is saying 54% still see the solution as being, look, long-term plan with low payments. That's how I'll manage my debt. But that has reduced remarkably and significantly even since our last study in 2022. So yes, it's still tough, but it's a big reduction. And there are significant, really statistically material increases in the customers saying, look, they are wanting and willing to work with a debt collection company. They are actually open to saying, if I can, I'll pay it off in one lump sum. And that's a shift from, well, I'll manage it in small repayments over time to I'll pay it off in one lump sum because it helps me get towards economic freedom. It helps me achieve what I want. And there's a big shift in attitudes of the willingness to do so, that desire to do so. I'll work with a financial advisor, I'll work with a debt collection company. And this subtle shifts by generation. When you get to Gen Z, actually, they're the only population where actually the answer of economic freedom was slightly different. Just ahead of being debt free, edge the freedom to buy what I want when I want. But I guess, how do you get that? You can only get that if you've become debt free. So there is that desire and there's that willingness. And actually, the right hand side tells us that 70% of consumers are saying, look, is equal or greater priority to other expenses for me to be debt free, because it is that enabler. So 70% see it being equal or greater than actually other expenditure. I need to achieve this. I want to achieve it. But how? It needs to work for them. And so how does it work for them? If we move to the next slide, this just starts to explore what do customers need? Well, they want, we know customers want flexibility. We know they value forbearance. But actually, the channel shifts here and there's actually an interesting dynamic we've discussed between the UK and the US. Email has increased significantly in the UK as a channel of choice here. 45% is the primary channel. So we often default to thinking, well, digital equals web chat. No, actually, living in your inbox is a thing of the past. We've in a way, email is antiquated, but more and more customers say, look, this is my preferred contact method. Actually, why? There's a degree of control it gives you, a degree of space, control, reflection, thinking, that ability and freedom. But equally, the telephone is not dead. And this isn't this is how we're going to contact you. Actually, after email, customers say, look, I'd like to pick up on a phone call. And we might get on to conversations about what insight we see from AI later on. This is a web chatbots. This isn't, it works for some customers, works for some consumers, and we particularly see it in the younger demographics and the millennials, that openness and desire to have those chats. But that is not the default channel of choice by any manner or form. So it comes to kind of that control and education. And there's no silver bullet. There is no one channel. But this is quite interesting insight it gives us into the breakdown. So actually, if we step on, Neil, from here, what does this mean for us? What do we need to look at? So you can't change a customer's perception unless you interact with them. We've seen, look, we need to look at contact channels, but that isn't it's not saying we want these automated chatbots. It's, yes, we want to be able to prioritize email, we want to be able to provide that mobile app, but it's giving that ability to engage, that ability to build trust across all of the channels. And actually those feedback tools, and it might feel like, small nuances, but reward isn't always around discounts. It can be around discounts. It can be personalized support. It can be those feedback links, see how I am moving towards economic freedom, how I am building towards it. So I think, I don't want to talk for too long. I've got an ability to do that. There's a lot more data. I'm really happy to answer questions as we go through, but have a look at some of the research, because I have a lot of positivity coming out of this, a huge amount of positivity from this research. Customers have massively positive intent. They want to repay their debts. They're cautiously optimistic about the future. Interestingly, and there's a shift between the UK and the US, customers are a lot more positive about their personal economic situation than the national one. And actually, maybe we aren't miserable Brits. Actually, in the UK, customers' perceptions about their own personal finances, are they improving? Will they be in a good place? Have improved significantly since the last survey in 2022. US, they've been flat. So customers have that. But we have this opportunity to kind of leverage flexibility, personalization, support, and treat with respect. So where does this leave me? Actually, I'm proud of what we do as debt collectors. I'm not afraid to say that to a friend or consumer, because those stigmas, debt is not a dirty word. It's not a bad word. Customers we want to help them. So in almost every case, we have the same thing, but we need to work out how we engage and how we build, because these are customers. They're not debtors. So, Neil, I'm happy to know, but I hope that gives a flavour for the research. And this is something we're going to continue to do. Yeah, we've been doing it for 3 years now because it gives us really great insight. And actually, I'm delighted that Joe can join us here today because I've said this at a lot of the sessions we have with the Institute of Customer Services. Yeah, customers don't choose to be a customer of a debt collection firm, but they are still our customers, and we need to have that same level of respect.
Well said.
Thank you, Jamie. Really appreciate you setting that up. I guess, Joe, I'll just come to you quickly before we sort of dive into particular areas. So, any immediate reactions to what you've heard there in the data?
Absolutely. And I think, Jamie, you're incredibly passionate about this subject, and I understand why. So it's really, really important and good to see. Now, a couple of, I suppose, reflections both on the research, but also the context of what we see in the Institute. And you'll be aware that we do the UK Customer Satisfaction Index, we do that twice a year. And I think what was quite stark is when you look at and we track financial well-being, and we also track that link to mental health and vulnerability more generally. And if I look at July's figures, the next survey, bit of a plug for this as well now, next survey comes out actually next week. But when we look at July's figures, we'll see that 15% of the UK population feel that they've got low financial well-being, or poor. So that's quite a significant number. But to your point, Jamie, about as customers and consumers, are we willing to engage? Are we willing to be involved? Or do we not want to be in debt? I concur completely. Because what we see is where the customer experience is good for them. So where the company is doing outreach, where they're being empathetic, where they are thinking about how they can actually help the customer to repay, and thinking about those payment plans, satisfaction levels are significantly higher. So there's a really big business goal here as well, because we know there's a correlation between high levels of customer satisfaction and financial well-being. So this intent, do most consumers or customers in a debt position want to pay back? Yes, I agree completely. You talked a lot, Jamie, about trust. Absolutely. Do I trust an organization? And the service experience, there's a clear correlation between building trust in an organization and the customer experience I have. So there's definite read crosses here that are really important for an organization. I know we're going to talk about channels and everything else, and I've definitely got some thoughts on that. So there's an important lesson for organizations about how they treat the customer, how they build confidence, how they build trust, and that correlation between that is really, really important.
Thanks, Joe. And I guess let's dive in with that, I guess. And I guess if I come to both of you on this, and feel free for whichever one of you wants to take it first to go ahead. I guess what does it mean in practical terms then? What are some examples of the things that we think firms and companies should be focusing on based on what we're hearing here?
Well, I'm sure Jamie's got some really good things that you are doing, but at a top level, there's definitely a big piece for me around genuine training around vulnerability and spotting vulnerability. Because some of our research, spotting it almost before it happens, some of our research has indicated that sometimes people aren't aware at the early stages, perhaps where they are going. So having really well-trained, empathetic operatives that can see some of those trends, look positively to engage, I think is really important. The obvious thing for me is flexible payment plans, and hardship policies, really seeking to understand what those issues are behind. Jamie, you talked about inflation. In the UK, we're on the back of a cost of living crisis. There are some, fairly major issues facing a number of individuals. So really understanding. And then I'm also really struck by really proactive communication, really leaning in and having consistent, so for me, my top things are around training, recognizing vulnerability and its forms that it takes. And I think that's also because I think also, and I think Jamie, you would agree with this, people go in and out of vulnerability too. It's not a kind of right, this person is vulnerable. And people don't like being labeled either, which is another piece. It's just a situation that customer is in at that time, but we need to be able to help and address that. So understanding vulnerability, and what that means, payment terms, flexibility over that, and proactive communication would be my big things.
Yes, I think try and avoid repetition. I'll kind of take a couple of probably tangential themes there because I think the understanding one is a really interesting and it's an odd way to shift, but it's something I love about regulation. When we look at how consumer duties kind of change some of the narrative, yeah, and to actually break it down to what it means. So customer understanding. Do you think like the average financial literacy of an adult in the UK is around 11 or 12 years old?
Mm.
And so shouting in big red threatening letters at the top of the letter is not the way to engage a customer. But actually putting that, how will a customer understand this? What does it actually mean? Because if you can't build understanding, you can't build on the top of it. And actually that really is, and there are professionals who work at this. Yeah, and to how you break down those barriers, how you engage, how you interact there. But what is making it easy? Making it easy for me is a big thing, but both for consumers, but also for colleagues. Because if I'm the watch out to spot vulnerability and I've got a million other screens to navigate and I've got to remember this training and I have to do this, how do I make it easy for my colleagues?
Yeah.
Because if it's not easy for my colleagues, it's not easy for my customers. You're not, you can have all the training in the world, but if you don't have the mental bandwidth, the cognitive space, and the ability to do that, if you feel under too much pressure, so how do you have that emotional ability to have that emotional interaction with a customer? So it's interesting when we think of where I go when I think of the use of technology, you can often think of AI and chatbots of what it does to automate interactions with consumers. I probably come from a different lens first, how to make it easy for our colleagues to do the things that computers can't do. So how do I use it to build that so you can spend the time understanding the customer rather than navigate and have that information to hand? How do you have tools say, look, you're missing some of these subtle signs of vulnerability? How do you help a customer recognize that? Sorry, a colleague recognize that and spot that, whether it's text mining, speech analytics tools, and actually then make it easy for a colleague to get access to support. So if I'm speaking to Joe on the phone and Joe's mentioned something, actually automating those links, bring it so at the touch of a finger, I know what advice and support I can give to a customer rather than having to go hunting.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate it. I think we'll probably explore some of those sort of more technical elements in a bit. I guess just coming to one of the things you mentioned a lot, Jamie, you mentioned that willingness for people to work with companies to get themselves to a point of economic freedom, whatever they define that to be. If I start with you, Joe, why do you think there is that willingness? What do you think is, you mentioned it's gone up. What's driving that, do you think?
Because I
think
think
a lot. Oh, sorry, Joe, you go first. Yeah.
sorry, Jamie. I would say, from my perspective, what's driving that is we are all human beings. Nobody wants to be in a position that they feel uncomfortable in, or worried, or that, this correlation between stress, this correlation between we being more anxious, debt concerns must be one of the biggest drivers for that. So they don't want to be in that position. None of us want to be in that position. Jamie, you made a point generally about they are customers, they have lives, they have things which, we're all trying to deal with. So the premise is, back to, and I'm struck by your point, 96%, I think it was, want to pay back because they're not a different set of people. They have the same issues and challenges that any of us would want. So they don't want to be in that position. So I think it is really important which is what you've highlighted brilliantly, Jamie, in this research, is the lens needs to change. These aren't people that are being difficult. These are people that are in a challenging position. And therefore, as organizations, one of our responsibilities needs to be to help them to move beyond that. That's good customer service, to get the outcome that they actually want. That also supports the FCA in terms of consumer duty to achieve the outcome that the customer actually wants. So the reason why they want to do that, because they want to get on with their lives. They don't want to be worrying about whether they can have affordability. So for me, it's not a surprise, but it means a cultural shift sometimes in our organizations to see these people as another customer group that just happen to be at that particular time in this position that we need to help.
And I think we've broken the script in a number of ways. Consumers have broken the script in their head of what debt, but we've helped break the script of you are consumers. It's not you need to pay me everything now.
Yeah.
And breaking that script actually, means we're not seen as threatening as we used to. Actually, often, and when I come right down to the debt collection industry, we're often seen as being more reasonable than the original creditors. And yeah, that's a big change in narrative inside of consumers because we've broken that script because building a little bit more psychological safety
Mm-hmm.
and there isn't the stigma. So you've got that support, you've taken away a lot of the stigma. There is that psychological safety. So yeah, but it comes down to I'm not wanting to repay a debt. I'm wanting to become debt free.
Yeah. I also think though, Jamie, just to build on that, we've still got some way to go. I mean, it's
Mm.
great, but the report is also showing that, 17%, I think, in the UK, aren't trusting enough. So where you started about the fact that organizations need to, and it has seen significant improvement, I can definitely agree with that. And and what you do at Cabot, I think, I've heard the calls, I've heard the conversations. I think that is a really important part of this. But what we're really discussing is how can organizations
Mm.
build on that and get the right culture inside of their organization to be able to do the appropriate type of outreach. Because what I'm hearing from this report is consumers want that and need that, and we're on a bit of a journey for that. So I agree completely. It has improved. We just need to keep on top of that and understand what else we can do to try and help that process.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of those we're seeking to do that because you build on it with a lot of the flavour and the nuance you don't get in the numbers. So we do. I feel like I'm on CSI Miami sometimes when we do these behind the mirror kind of sessions. I pretend to be a policeman sat in the back room, but just listening to the richness of what consumers say because I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here, saying like you can't help a customer unless you're able to interact with them. But just interacting with them, that is such a crucial point because that's the point where you get the opportunity to challenge those old stigmas, to build trust, to take away the fear. And hear how we get it wrong because we know customers saying 96% want to repay it, but actually only 26% want to work with a debt collection agency to do so. Yeah, and that first interaction, and we hear in some of these research, just because you're engaging with us doesn't mean you're understanding them. You're actually helping them understand that my aspiration is to get you debt free in the shortest affordable time. It's not to pay everything now, but unless you're able to, build that level of engagement, trust, and shared, and that kind of shared aspiration, just because I've made contact, just because I'm speaking, just because I'm there, actually, that is such a key opportunity, and it becomes a barrier sometimes because if you're not able to address those points, you can't move on. If you're not able to establish that, and this is what do you want? Actually, not what do I want as a debt collection firm. What do you want as my customer? What is important to you?
Put yourself in their shoes,
Yeah,
and really
listening
try and
rather
see.
than
Yeah, yeah. I think also, Jamie, one of the things, I mean, you stressed very heavily about channel choice. And as we said, we'll come on to AI and technology and the role that it has. But I'm very struck that that reads across to all of our research as well. So, we all have preferences of channel of choice. And I'm probably not surprised about email for the reasons that you said as well, Jamie, over this, because what email can do is it provides that control, and convenience. It's also a written record.
yeah,
So I don't know about anybody else, but whatever I'm doing, if I've got some structure around this and I can think, okay, right, fine, I know what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, how I'm doing it. So it's about control from that point in terms of a written record. It lowers emotional intensity. I think there's definitely a bit around that. So it feels less and gives me a plan. So it's accessible. And still, although there are some definite issues with internet and everything else in the UK, particularly for this type of group, the accessibility thing is quite
yeah,
important. But I think you made an important point, Jamie, around channel choice. And as I said, in the wider if I look at customer service more broadly, channel choice is really important. So having the ability for us as organizations to flex that and to move to the channel choice. So it might be that you want a telephone conversation, then it moves to email, you might bounce back to a telephone conversation. It's more about, you mentioned engagement. What
mm,
is the best way to get the best outcome, go back to the FCA, for this customer and for me as a business? Well,
yeah,
that's to engage in an appropriate way through the right channel of choice. And I think that will always remain, even though technology is at such a pace now, and we're only seeing some of the initial stages of what AI, for example, can do. But I do think sometimes on the AI side, some organizations have rushed to the execution, the delivery bit being through technology, rather than thinking, how can the technology actually help the end-to-end customer experience?
Yeah.
And Jamie, you talked about that very eloquently around helping your agents. So
Yes.
where AI can be brilliant is it can bring great levels of data, information, even tone and emotional contact together to say, you know,
Yeah.
this customer seems to be experiencing this. Have a think about how you're going to deal with that. So the prompting, the response, all of that, I think, is a brilliant use of AI. But forcing somebody down a channel to talk to a chatbot, particularly in this situation, I don't think is what a
No,
customer wants.
I love your point about emotional regulation.
Yeah,
Because if you think I'm going to make a controversial statement here, I think debt is a more significant thing in my life than wet wipes.
yeah,
And we've moved to a world of instancy, of always on. Yeah, I was watching something on Amazon Prime, and that's the reason I use wet wipes. Literally, in the advert, came with a wet wipe, and I could press the button on my TV, and all of a sudden, the wet wipes were in my Amazon shopping basket. Jeff Bezos always had this one click to buy, but I almost didn't even need to click, didn't need to touch my device, and I'd ordered wet wipes on my TV.
yeah.
But email, and actually, gives you that asynchronicity in a world that's always immediacy, gives you that, because you've got to think about these things. When we talk about that financial literacy is low, you can't always react immediately. You need that thinking space. So that's around having that safety, I think.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Good, thank you both. Just a reminder, if you've got a question for us, please pop it in. I think the Q&A facility. I think the chat one is limited from what I'm hearing from a couple of people. So yeah, please feel free to pop it in the Q&A box, and I will put things to Joe and Joe and Jamie as we go. I guess right, you guys have both spoken a lot there about channels. You've spoken about the openness people have to working with us. You've mentioned a couple of times trust, and I'd just like to come back to that for a moment and say, what are the key ways we should be building trust then? How do we get these interactions right? We keep talking about building it. What do you both think are the, one or two things maybe that are going to build a level of trust? Joe, I don't know if we want to start with you on that one.
Yeah, because, and again, there's read across to the broader customer experience, and this is probably no different, but just needs to be thought about a little bit more because some of the things that comes with more broader vulnerability. But trust means basis on an open and honest dialogue, a sense that this organization is ethical and is trying to help me. Demonstrating genuine care. I actually do care that this customer is well treated. I do really care about how Jamie might feel or Neil might feel through this process. And a real understanding of the customer circumstances. And if you think about it, there's nothing more irritating, is it, when someone says, "Oh yeah, yeah, I know where you are," when you think, actually, you don't. You've not walked in my shoes. So this is what I mean about being authentic. So this isn't about platitudes. This isn't about scripts. This isn't about, you know, um, just saying something because actually that's what it's supposed to, you're supposed to say. It's about how that is delivered, how that connection. You mentioned engagement. So trust comes from a regular dialogue. It also comes from building that trust. We often say, don't we, trust is hard earned and easily lost in any relationship. So for me, this is no different to how you would be, if I think about my relationship with my mum, if I think about my relationship with my colleagues, if I think about, but also understanding that there will be heightened tensions, emotion, and probably lots of stuff going on for this group of customers. So for me, it's about an interaction, and you build that with respect. So
Yeah.
you demonstrating the level of respect for the customer. You are there to serve the customer, whatever that customer's needs is. And that's a very different kind of perhaps mindset. People don't want to be pitted. They want to be able to have a solution. Economic freedom is what you were talking about, Jamie. So for me, that levels of equal relationship and trust. and respect are really important.
And it's coming from the other end. It's easier to break trust than build it.
Yeah.
How can you break trust? You can break trust by surprise or inconsistency of we're here to help, we're here to help, we're here to help, we're here to help. Okay, I'm going to be sending you to court.
Yeah.
Is that there's a degree of honesty of being honest about conversations that might happen, being frank and honest. But that level of surprise and inconsistency comes in, saying, we'll help, I'm here to help, but what I need you to do, we're here,
Yeah.
but what I need you to do is, well, we're here to help. Yeah, we're here to make you do what we want. But there's also the slow trust destroyers. So what chips away, what consistently chips away, and that could be that degree of automation, that degree of, oh well, I can't get it. It doesn't your reply didn't match what I asked for. There's repetition. There's the same message. Systems overriding. It's these slow trust destroyers that just chip away, and nag at what you need to do. And so this, for me, I'd probably bring it down to you break trust with, actually that degree of consistency with things that chip away at trust. Yeah, but then it comes into that degree of moral failure, actually. So coming at those signs, how can I consistently do that? It's not easy.
Mm. I think it's a really important point about what you say is, it's the old adage, isn't it? There's no point walking the floor, saying all of these new things. They're not platitudes. You've got to work at it, which means the customer journey, the systems, the things that you build about, the training that we put in place for our operatives, the support from a customer and an employee point of view, coaching in terms of colleagues, all of those things help in terms of identifying. I also think, and you said an important point, Jamie, that I would concur with. This is not a passive relationship, if that makes sense. We're requiring the customer to do something, and therefore being really clear about that and giving a plan and clarity about each of the steps and following those through, build that trust.
Yeah.
So delivering on what
Yeah.
you're saying, but engaging that. And that's what I mean about that mutual respect. I will do, I need you to do. Yeah, it's that kind of, and if you engage in that way, great, brilliant. So we've got to the past stage, right? Let's go to the next stage. And then, and it's also to your point, it's not about paying off the money, it's about the outcome. It's about the vision of where that customer wants to be and how they're going to get there. And you're the solution to help them, but they've got to do something. It's a bit like, I don't know about you, Jamie, but it's a bit like I want to be 3 stone lighter. Well, I might want to be that, okay, but I got to do something about that. Now I can follow a diet, I can have, someone put me on a plan and everything else. But if I don't engage with that plan, I won't get the outcome that I actually need. But it's how you support me and say, oh, actually, well done this week, Joe. You did really well. You managed to lose 2 pounds or whatever. So that relationship, that engagement bit is really important.
I think that there's honesty comes into that as well, Joe, because you would like to be 3 stone lighter. You can achieve that. I'd like to look like George Clooney. I've got sod all chance of that. But there is a degree of actually having to be honest. If you won't, if not being honest, because when you think back, almost crikey, going to almost like Stoic philosophy, you think debt causes anxiety. Where does most anxiety come from? It comes from like perceptions of control. And so the question I often think about and use is, will a customer feel more or less in control than they did before?
Yeah.
So it's certainty. If you say, after I've had this interaction or after the customer, will they feel more certain or more in control than before? Because if it's going the opposite direction, if they're feeling less in control, that's the spiral. So I find that quite a good acid test question. Does this give a feeling of more control and more certainty or less?
Yeah. No, I would agree with that.
I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to sort of link in one of the questions we've had in the chat, if I can, for you both, which kind of links to something you've been talking about there around building trust and the people who need to execute that in the best possible way. The question we've got is, what advice would you both give to people that come from a customer service role and move into a debt collection role where they're supporting these kind of customers? What would be the key pieces of advice that you would give those people? Jamie, let's start with you.
Yeah, probably not going to go for kind of like the training manual. There is a mindset shift. Yeah, actually, you've got to rather than you've got to understand what is sitting in front of you, because the consumers that we deal with in debt collection, they haven't chosen to be a customer. I did not opt for Apple or Android, and so you've got to understand that kind of mindset shift, because you're going to be dealing with customers that kind of not necessarily wanting to buy something, but with an issue. So it's more actually think, well, I'm coming from an issue resolution perspective. I'm coming from a help desk perspective. It's not a customer support from that perspective. It's not a conversation that you're trying to win. Yeah, you're not trying to win a conversation with the consumer. Winning is like, solving an issue in customer service. But actually, for us, it's what you want to use, that control, that stability, because it's not going to be fixed overnight. But equally, I think and we talk about this with our trainees. There's a difference of just learning to get comfortable with silence and not rushing things. Because that level of engagement, understanding, is. But equally, again, I love to contradict myself. Don't change anything, because if you're coming from a perspective of customer service, these are customers that we're wanting to serve. So it's more subtle and nuanced than that. You're not coming to be a debt collector. You come to someone who helps resolve debt. So it is a customer service role. It's why we're members of the Institute of Customer Service. So, but it's just you're dealing with a different demographic and a different subset of customers who come into it with a natural level of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Jamie, can I ask you a question as a build on that? Because, and it also relates to the other question that I can see in the chat, which is, I'm sure this does happen where you've got a customer that's consistently not, I guess, looking to respond. It may only be that 4%, but how do we tackle that 4%? And in your training, because I know that you do this, so when people come kind of join, what are the practical things that you do to, I suppose there's two questions in one for me. One is around the question from Kane around the customer, what do I need to know or change or whatever? And I would agree with you in some respects, very little, because what the people in customer service roles, I think are particularly good at is that they're inquiring, they're open, they ask lots of questions, they're supportive, they are interested in the round in terms of the customer experience. All of those things are the sorts of skills and capabilities you need in debt collection, I would be arguing, and your approach and your commitment to that. But when you do get a really tough case where perhaps we're not progressing that, what do you do to try and support your operatives, or what advice would you have around that?
I think.
Sorry, Neil, am I allowed to ask questions?
Oh, absolutely.
Of course, Joe. Absolutely.
Because some of this, this time at case really for brutal honesty in some conversations, and actually, I could probably guarantee 100% customer satisfaction in my business, but I would be out of business, and actually we wouldn't have affordable credit in the system, and so there is that degree of brutal honesty of it. It was this of consequences. It's a case of saying but that is not as a surprise down the line. But look, I'm really sorry, Joe, but if you're not able to work with me, if we're not able to come to a reasonable solution, this is what I'm going to do and why. But then having to follow through with that, because and sometimes it's not necessarily a judgment on somebody's character, it could come from a position of fear. But ultimately, well, this will happen, and we need to have that level of brutal honesty at times, and actually say, well, just because, Joe, your preference would be to pay me £5 a month. It's not my preference as a debt collector, because I'd like to pay me everything back tomorrow. But if I honestly believe you have the affordability, it is not unreasonable. And the FSA it's about is it reasonable? No, actually, Joe, I think it is reasonable. I honestly think it's reasonable that you could afford to pay me more. And empowering my staff and because this is difficult. How do I give you the confidence as a member of staff working in debt collection to say something that might feel contrary to what are the fear factor from a debt collector, the fear of regulation, the fear of process? How do I empower my staff with the confidence, the training, and the ability to have difficult conversations, but to explain why? So, Joe, I'm sorry, I realise you would like to do this, but I'm afraid, actually, I'm not sure it's appropriate in your circumstance. Made
And I
some,
think that is really important, Jamie, because and it's back to this mutual respect side, isn't it? I'm going to
Mm.
do this, but I need you to do that. And this is what we're going to get
yeah,
in return. And that's about tone, that's about the empathy, that's about the outreach, and it's about clarity, and it is about being honest. So, in some ways, Kane, I would say that those are exactly the same principles as you would do in any customer interaction. But, Jamie, I think there is another side of this, which is often some of these people that you and your teams will be dealing with are incredibly vulnerable, and that could be very upsetting for the agent that is dealing with that too. So, the coaching and the support that an organization puts around that, I can only imagine if you've had, I don't know, X number of calls or seen some fairly very, very upsetting
yeah,
situations that people in, how you support your people with that, I think is
yeah,
also really, really important
yeah,
in terms of coaching or even counselling. And I'm pretty sure, and I know that Jamie, you do this for some of the worst cases, there is counselling services
yeah.
available for your staff because you mentioned that in terms of the importance of the employee engagement and supporting because they are basically delivering on the business plan of your organization. And that's difficult sometimes.
And it's something a bit of a probably an ICS plug here, but it's something I think you guys have done very, very well. Yeah, so much customer service doesn't start with the customer; it starts with the colleague delivering it. And yeah, there's two extremes that my colleagues have to. At one end, you're dealing with customers who are in those terrible situations and some harrowing calls that you'll listen to. But actually, I also listen to some harrowing calls, which is pretty harrowing for what the colleague is having to go through, the abuse that they can get.
Yeah.
And so it's from one side, actually, I've got to support my staff. So, yeah, dealing with things that could feel quite personal, quite threatening,
Mm,
quite
mm,
horrible. And yeah, say,
mm.
I will stand by you,
Yeah.
the colleague.
Mm.
Yeah, I will not tolerate this.
Yeah.
This is unacceptable.
Yeah.
But equally, really upsetting some of those other situations. It's really about how, giving staff that confidence comes. I've got your back as my colleague, and I will support you and protect you from this. If this is something we will not tolerate, I will support you if you've had to do something, deal with something that is horrible, some of the phone calls, but equally how I can give you that level of confidence to say it is okay to do this. And just saying it's okay to do this is so joke. Yeah, I'm not going to say it's okay for you to try and ask me to pay debt back because I want to do it for Cabot. So actually, why? Why? Because well, actually, it is not unreasonable to. The customer was originally paying this; they can afford to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a reasonable and moral thing to do. It helps the economy. It helps. It is real. I'm not saying because Jamie and Cabot say so. I'm saying because it is fair. It is reasonable. It is appropriate. Yeah, but
And
giving
actually,
that level of
ultimately, is
confidence.
right for the customer too,
Yeah, yeah,
because this is a spiral that the customer needs to get out of.
yeah.
So, it's about. I mean, what I'm really struck by, Jamie, is viewing, and there's a bigger point here, isn't it? Viewing debt collection in a totally different space.
Mm,
And you mentioned about outcome, you mentioned and the importance of consumer duty in that, and you mentioned that. It's not the transaction. It's not that I want to pay off this bill. How do I do it? It's what that I want to be able to live a better life or an easier life or a debt-free life. And
mm,
I think keeping that in mind, what is, and understanding the goals of the customer helps also as part of that
mm,
conversation, because
mm,
you're setting that right at the front. What do you want to achieve? And I want to be debt free. Okay,
mm,
great. Then this is not going to be easy.
mm, mm,
So we're going to do this in stages, and I will need you to do so. Establishing that relationship, I think, is really important. But to your point, this is not doing everything that the customer wants because
nice.
we can't. And that
Mm,
would be the same whether that was vulnerable customers or whether that was someone that isn't in a vulnerable. But there is a duty of care. There is a need to
Mm.
be reasonable. There is a need to be able to understand that position of that
mm,
customer
yeah.
and give a solution that is fair and
Mm,
reasonable, which
Mm.
is, I think, the really important point as part of this dialogue. You mentioned, Jamie, around protecting and supporting the staff. So, I think there is the one bit which is around dealing with when you've had to deal with something particularly harrowing or emotionally upsetting and the support. I also think, and what you're referencing on the other side of that is our Service with Respect campaign.
Yeah.
That, in some cases, the level of abuse, and it is abuse, that's very different to trying to help somebody, is not acceptable. And everybody, if you're in a customer facing role, dealing with any kind of customer, should not be in fear of doing their job and should not have to put up with abusive behavior. And I know, Jamie, I've listened to some of the calls that you have had. And I would just say that, if that is happening in your organization or you're seeing that, do go and have a look at the Institute's website, because we've got a lot of support on, which we call under our Service with Respect campaign, in terms of trying to do that.
So I'm conscious both we've got about 7 minutes left, and I'd like to try and get to as much as what we've got from the audience as I can, to be honest. So just skipping back, Joe, you referenced one of the questions we'd had there that was around the sort of 4% who were less willing. I guess just to sort of quickly cover that one and make sure that we do acknowledge that, and the person in the question was talking about those that sort of go round the cycle and we never really get there. Jamie, you mentioned earlier that it's not necessarily about winning. I guess with those particular customers, it's about controlling what we can control and trying to do the right things, but understanding sometimes it doesn't always work, I guess.
Yeah. There is a level of acceptance there. There has to be, and I mean, from some, and there's a level of commerciality and acceptance we need to think about as from an industry perspective as well. Of what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again, and expecting a different result. It's sometimes you just have to accept we can't control everything. So if focus on the 96%. There's and so many things are easy to say and because building trust equally is building trust with colleagues as well, because a lot of this stuff is well, I'll support you, but if you're in a business that's got 20 members of staff, 200 members of staff, 400 members, actually, how do you understand the pockets and the differences within there? Because a lot can kind of get lost in the noise. So it's
Thank you. I'm just going to come to this next one that says, you guys have talked a lot about building trust, and this particular person is saying, how do you feel about this idea of maybe people dealing with one person? Is it best to kind of build a relationship with one person, or is it best for you to have around a group of people, do you feel, that can provide the same thing? Where do you sit on that kind of, I like my first call agent, so I'd like to stick with them kind of thing?
John, aspirationally, I would love it. But Neil, if the only person Cabot I had to deal with you was you, then it'd be great. My life would be a lot easier. A lot of people know who my boss is, but honestly, I would love it. But there's a degree of reality, and actually, when we think of it, is it practical? Is it pragmatic? Because what would the consequences? What would the impact be? How do I, if I think of it, and actually come from, I have to accept we're a commercial organisation. What level of efficiency can we build in order to make this sustainable? Because what would that do for the business, the engagement, the cost? There are some cases I don't care about the cost. We need to case manage because of the circumstances. But sometimes it's around colleague preference, customer preference, consumer preference. So what's the step beyond that? If I can't get to the situation of why would I say I'd like to speak to the same person every time? Actually, if you dig under it, it's probably not because I want to speak to the same person every time. It's because my underlying need there is I don't want to have to repeat myself. I want the person I'm speaking to kind of understand. I don't have to go over the same things again. I want to have confidence that I'm not going to get a different answer. I'm going to have consistency. So what's the next best thing? How can you support that? So how can I feel it a little bit like, the last time, I spoke, Neil, if I have two conversations with you and you go, oh yeah, Jamie, last time you spoke to my colleague, I note that you said this. That can be darned hard to find when you've got 15 different screens and narratives. If I can't do that, what can I do the next step to get the underlying customer need? So I think it is have to try and get that balance.
And I think what my take, Neil, on this would be, and again, if I look at the broader kind of customer piece, we're talking about outcome. So trying to achieve the customer's outcome. There is something interesting, and if you look across or read across other industry sectors where you can take ownership, end-to-end ownership, and to resolve the problem. That is really helpful. And
Mm.
you can definitely see that. So this is not about handing people off or giving it to somebody else. And your point, Jamie, about making sure that the data, the information, the same person, consistency can pick up and take that conversation forward is definitely, absolutely one of the key things that has to happen. So you've got to have a hunt group or a group of people that really do understand that. I
Mm.
personally think for probably some of the economics and some of probably the more complex than, and you would know this better than I, than having the same person deal with that in order to try and resolve that is probably one of the better outcomes that
Yeah,
you. But I think it's like everything, isn't it? Depends on the complexity of the
yeah,
issue and the problem. And I think I would encourage people, if it is a very complex problem, to create that safety net, that
yeah,
psychological safety net.
yeah,
But the important thing is that generally, do not ask me to have to repeat myself, and do not make me have to keep reliving some of these
Mm.
things that I'm going through. Let's keep moving this conversation forward, which means it
Mm.
has to be based on good information and
mm,
data and
Mm.
genuine understanding,
mm.
which means that you've got to have, an exceptionally well-trained and
Yeah.
supported team.
And God, I'm going to deliberately disagree with you at one point there, because actually, so much we can rest on the shoulders of colleagues, a well-trained team. Actually, you can't train at everything. So
Mm.
I'm not dismissing, but how do you achieve that? Because
Mm.
crikey, if I try and put myself in the shoes of some of our consultants, you're almost asking to do the impossible.
Mm.
Yeah, and we can't fix stuff like this overnight. But
I,
how do
what
yeah,
I would say,
yeah,
Jamie, it's not, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about what the management and the leadership does
yeah,
to support them to
yeah.
make sure
That's
they're
my
in the
yeah.
best or the strongest
Yeah.
place.
Click. Yeah, yeah. Because yeah, increasingly, if I want, you know, my colleagues in our office in Kings Hill to be able to do this, it's not like expecting more of them. It's what I can do to enable them to do it more
Literally,
easily. Try,
literally.
it's really easy to say, but I mean, when I speak to my management, one of the things we're speaking a lot more, how can I make people's jobs easier?
Mm.
Yeah,
And yeah, because
yeah.
that's the level of enabler.
Yeah. And also back to this point, how can you make it easier? But does the management understand? So if I go to them with an issue or a problem or something that I've seen, so how, we know, don't we? All our data shows us this, that there's
Mm.
such a strong correlation between higher levels of employee engagement. And I think people that are working in the types of industries that we're discussing now have huge levels of engagement. It's a tough job. I think we should recognize that. Really tough job. And therefore, that link between higher levels of employee engagement, higher levels of customer satisfaction, and then higher levels of return for the business
Mm.
is proven yet again,
Yeah.
and something that I feel very strongly. Yeah.
Jamie, I'm going to be really cheeky because I know we are at time, but I'm going to be really cheeky and give you in the 30 seconds or less, please, Jamie, if you can. Um, the last one we had in sort of 10 minutes ago that I would like to get to was just what do you anticipate will happen to debt levels across the UK in the coming year? Do you think that where do you see that going? As I say, 30 seconds or less because I know where it's.
I'm a crystal ball. Is the US has seen really increasing rates of delinquency for the last. We haven't. Delinquency since COVID has been really, really flat. But in truth, it is going to rise. Yeah, we are going to see. But I think a lot of it is hidden. Yeah, I think we are seeing debt increase, but it's just in different sectors and different products. It's buy now, pay later. It's other forms of lending. Because speaking from Cabot perspective, we do very much with high street prime lenders. Actually, the regulation on kind of affordability control and outcomes. Actually, I think a lot of credit has moved elsewhere. There's a lot of personal debt, friendship debt, family debt. Yeah, and so I think the nature of debt has increased. Yeah, but not necessarily default rates, because I think it's the nature and where that debt is.
And I would just add, well, obviously it depends very much in terms of what goes on in the broader economy too. Unemployment is one of the biggest issues at the
Mm.
moment. That we have seen a slight rise in that. I suspect things follow through the pipe at a different kind of rate in terms of that
Mm.
side. So there is a likelihood. One thing I will say there, Jamie, and I was also struck by this, where you said that actually the confidence level of customers in terms of their own personal financial well-being was pretty strong. We're also seeing that despite what the wider economic environment might be saying. So there are some degrees of positivity. And, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think it comes back to the early part of our conversation, trying to spot those trends before they get too bad. So if you're in an organization more broadly that we're not talking about getting to debt collection stage, what are the things and what are the responsibilities that organizations should be taking to try and manage that? Loaning money sensibly is what we're talking about, making sure that customers can have that affordability to play the plan. So there's almost something further up the pipeline here, even before we get to this stage.
Good. Well, sorry, I think there is a couple more questions in the Q&A that sort of come in the last minute or so, but I'm gonna call us on time there. Thank you very much to everyone that joined us online. Really appreciate you taking your time out your Thursday morning to come and join us. Joe, Jamie, thanks from me and everyone else for all of your insight and what's been a really interesting conversation. So thanks for taking the time to take us through that this morning. Really appreciate it.
Neil, thank you. And can I just say, great report, and thank you for involving the Institute. Really appreciate it. And good to see you both again.
Good to see you both. And we'll see you all again soon. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.